The sharp, piercing sound of shattering porcelain ripped through the quiet luxury of the villa, a sound as clean and cruel as a scalpel's cut.
Useless! You are absolutely, utterly useless.
And Harvey's mother-in-law, Mrs. Zhong, pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the shards glittering maliciously on the floor. Her carefully made-up face, usually a mask of detached superiority, was now twisted in a grotesque sneer of fury.
This was a limited edition Master's Collection tea set. Do you have any idea what it was worth? Just one set. And you couldn't even handle that. The Chang family was truly cursed the day we brought a clumsy, good-for-nothing like you into this house.
And Harvey knelt silently on the cold marble, her slender hands moving with a practiced, almost robotic calm to pick up each sharp piece. Her long, dark hair fell like a curtain, obscuring half her face, hiding eyes that were as still as an undisturbed autumn lake. For 3 years, a lifetime it seemed, insults like these had become the familiar, droning soundtrack of her existence. They were so familiar they no longer stung. They had been absorbed into her skin, leaving behind only a cold, numb resilience that felt more like armor than flesh. She had learned that silence was her only sanctuary, the only response that didn't escalate the storm.
Mom, calm down. It's just a tea set.
Trinmin Triot's voice, laced with impatience, drifted down from the grand, sweeping staircase. He descended, a walking paradox in his expensive, perfectly tailored suit, his handsome face etched with a chronic fatigue and a simmering irritation that seemed permanently fixed there. He shot a glance at an Harvey, his eyes the same eyes that once looked at her with youthful adoration now, filled with an undisguised, weary disgust.
Harvey, just go to your room, stop being underfoot and upsetting Mom.
He sighed, rubbing his temples. It wasn't a defense. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was a dismissal, as casual and unthinking as shooing away a stray animal. And Harvey said nothing. She rose, disposed of the broken pieces with the quiet efficiency of a ghost, and turned to walk upstairs. Her back was perfectly straight, a posture of ingrained dignity, yet it radiated a profound, almost crushing loneliness. She was a stranger in her own home, a silent occupant of a life that was no longer hers. Upstairs, in Trinmin Triot's sprawling study, a battlefield of creativity lay in ruins. Crumpled blueprints littered the floor like the casualties of a lost war. The Star Tower, a skyscraper project of monumental scale, hailed as the city's next great architectural landmark, was his golden opportunity and his personal, torturous hell. Damn it, he roared, a guttural sound of pure frustration, as he savaged another sheet of expensive paper, crumpling it into a tight ball of failure. Why can't I think of anything at all? The door creaked open, so softly he almost didn't hear it. Harvey entered, bearing a tray with a single, steaming cup of herbal tea, its gentle aroma a stark contrast to the acrid scent of his desperation. She placed it gently on the one clear corner of his massive oak desk. Her calm eyes swept over the carnage of failed drawings, and for the first time that evening, they flickered with an unreadable light. "Still no ideas?" she asked. Her voice was a soft murmur, almost lost in the large room, as if she were afraid of disturbing the tempest of his rage. "What's it to you?" Trinmin Triot snapped, not even looking up. His voice was a whip crack. "What in God's name would a housewife like you know about parametric design or structural engineering? Your world is the kitchen and the laundry room. Get out." And Harvey flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her shoulders. She bit her lip but, surprisingly, didn't leave. Her gaze drifted to the central design on his desk, a clumsy, unbalanced structure that felt both heavy and weak. It was an architectural contradiction. After a long moment of silence, she spoke again, her voice so low, it was almost as if she were speaking to herself. "What if," she began, tracing an invisible line in the air. "What if the spire wasn't a needle, but a curve? A gentle, logarithmic spiral, like the structure of a nautilus shell. It would symbolize ascension, organic growth. And it would naturally embody the golden ratio. It would feel inevitable. She paused, her eyes distant, lost in a world he couldn't see. And the body, instead of rigid supports, you could use a tensegrity system inspired by the twisting muscles of a ballerina endpoint, a delicate reach for the sky. It would create a form that is both ethereally graceful and structurally unyielding. Her words, soft as they were, landed in the silent room. The claps. They weren't just suggestions, they were revelations. They were the missing pieces, the very soul his project lacked. Ling Shuang stared at her, utterly stunned, his mouth slightly agape. His mind, which had been a barren wasteland moments before, was now exploding with light. The golden ratio, a ballerina, these were strokes of unparalleled genius. But his awe, bright and fleeting, was immediately soured by a wave of suspicion and ingrained contempt. He couldn't reconcile the woman standing before him, the timid, uninteresting wife he barely acknowledged, with the source of such brilliance. "You, how do you know all this?" he demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. Her eye started, as if waking from a trance, suddenly realizing she had crossed a line, revealed a part of herself she had kept buried for 3 long years. She quickly bowed her head, her voice returning to its usual mousy whisper. I think I read it in a book somewhere." "Get out," he ordered again, his voice now eerily calm, but laced with a terrifying, dismissive coldness. He had what he needed. The moment Harvey's back was turned, he lunged for his desk like a starving man lunging for bread. His hands trembled as he grabbed a pencil. He sketched furiously, his mind racing to capture the lightning she had just unleashed. Fluid lines, a breathtakingly perfect structure, a dance of glass and steel, it all began to emerge on the page, a masterpiece born not of his mind, but of his theft. He didn't sleep that night, or the night after. He worked in a manic, feverish haze, refining, modeling, and perfecting her vision, claiming it as his own with every stroke of the pen, every click of the mouse. A week later, the architectural world was turned on its head. The news broke like a tidal wave. Ling Shuang, a relative unknown, had beaten a host of industry legends to win the exclusive design rights for the Star Tower project. His design was hailed by critics as the soul of modern architecture, a paradigm shift, a perfect fusion of high art and cutting-edge engineering. Ling Shuang became a star overnight. He was on the cover of magazines, a guest on talk shows, the new messiah of the architectural world. That evening, he returned home, not with his usual cloud of weariness, but with an insufferable air of arrogant triumph. And Harvey, despite the growing chasm between them, had prepared a feast to celebrate his monumental success. A small, hopeful part of her thought that maybe, just maybe, this achievement would bridge the gap, that he would see her again. But what she received was not a word of thanks. It was a final, brutal severance. A single white sheet of paper was pushed across the polished dining table, sliding to a stop in front of her. 2 words, printed in bold, black ink, screamed up at her like a death sentence: divorce papers. What is this?" Harvey's voice was a strangled whisper. Her heart felt as if it had been seized and crushed by an invisible, icy hand. "Sign it," Ling Shuang said coldly, his voice devoid of any emotion. He was examining his fingernails, as if the end of their marriage was a mundane piece of business. "My status is different now. I need a wife who can walk the red carpet with me, a woman who understands my world, who belongs in high society, not a common housewife who only knows her way around a kitchen." Is that the only reason?" The words tore from her throat, raw with a pain that was almost physical. "After everything, after the idea. Don't you get it?" A third voice, sharp and dripping with condescending pity, cut in. Jiang woke to it. the beautiful and powerful daughter of a real estate tycoon, emerged from the shadows of the hallway where she had been waiting. She glided to Trin Min Triat's side, linking her arm possessively with his. She looked down at an heavy eye with the triumphant, merciless eyes of a predator. You've become a burden to him. A stain on his glorious career path, an embarrassing footnote. Only I am worthy of standing by his side now. And Harvey's gaze shot to Trin Min Triat, desperately searching his face for one last flicker of affection, of memory, of shared history. But all she found was a cold, unyielding resolve. He had taken her soul, her genius, her very essence, and used it as a stepping stone to his new life. And in that new life, there was no room for her. A wave of white-hot pain washed over her, so intense it almost made her double over. But then, something else rose to meet it, something cold, hard, and ancient. It was the part of herself she had locked away for him, for this life. And it was awake now. The numbness receded, replaced by a chilling clarity. "Fine," she said, lifting her head. For the first time in 3 long years, she looked him straight in the eye, and for the first time, he saw not a wife, but a stranger. Her once still eyes were now a deep, bottomless ocean, and far below the surface, a terrifying storm was gathering. "I'll leave." She stood up, her movements fluid and graceful, and turned away. She walked out of the dining room, out of the house, taking nothing with her but the simple clothes on her back and the resurrected genius in her soul. Trin Min Triat watched her go, a vague, inexplicable sense of unease stirring deep within him, but he quickly dismissed it. What could a useless, penniless woman possibly do? He had everything now. He had no idea that the moment an Havi walked out that door, Ling Shuang, the forgotten, legendary queen of the architectural world, had officially and irrevocably awakened from the ashes. And the storm he couldn't see was about to make landfall. Leaving the cold, opulent villa behind, and Havi never looked back. To look back would be to acknowledge a life that had been a lie, a sacrifice made in vain. She walked through the city's glittering, indifferent night, but the darkness couldn't swallow her. Instead, it acted like a velvet curtain, a dramatic backdrop that accentuated the quiet, unyielding determination in every single step. The air of submission she had worn for 3 years, like a heavy cloak, had finally fallen away, leaving behind the sharp, clean lines of her true self. She stopped not at a taxi stand, but at an old, weathered payphone booth tucked away in a quiet alley, a relic from a bygone era, a place for conversations that left no digital trace. Her slender fingers, which had grown accustomed to laundry and cooking, now moved with an old, familiar precision, dialing a number she hadn't called in 3 years, but had never forgotten. The line picked up on the first ring, almost as if the person on the other end had been waiting. A deep, respectful male voice, warm with a loyalty that had weathered her long absence, answered, "Miss Ling Shuang." "It's me, Uncle Chin." And Harvey's voice was still gentle, but it had shed the last vestiges of weakness and submission. It carried a strange, unnerving calm, the calm at the eye of a hurricane, reactivate everything. All accounts, all assets, and it's time for a faded dream studio to reopen its doors. "Miss," Uncle Kin's voice on the other end trembled, thick with a mix of relief and profound emotion. "We've been waiting for you for 3 long years. The studio is just as you left it, covered in dust, but waiting. Thank you for waiting, Uncle Chin. The dust will be cleared soon." Hanging up, and Harvey stepped out of the booth and looked up at the night sky, at the distant, unblinking stars. Faded Dream. That was the name of the studio she had shuttered 3 years ago, a painful, self-imposed exile she had undertaken when she decided to give up her entire world to marry Trin Min Triat. She had wanted a simple life, a life of love. What a fool she had been. Now, that dream was no longer faded. It was about to be reborn, not as a dream, but as an empire. Meanwhile, in the penthouse office of the Disheng Group headquarters, a space of minimalist steel and glass that overlooked the entire city, Ko Thuadian, the young, powerful, and notoriously discerning chairman, stood before a holographic 3D model of the Star Tower. It rotated slowly in the air, a silent, breathtaking marvel of design. But his expression was not one of satisfaction. His sharp, intelligent eyes were narrowed in concentration. This design was too perfect, too flawless, too soulful to be the product of a man with a portfolio as bland and uninspired as Trinh Minh Triad's. It carried a familiar stylistic signature, a voice that resonated with a ghost he had been chasing for years. "Assistant Zhong," he said, his voice low and commanding, never taking his eyes off the hologram. "I want a full, deep-dive investigation into Trinh Minh Triad's entire design process for this project. Every meeting, every draft, every consultant he spoke to." Ling Shuang, a name that was both a legend and a frustrating enigma in the global architectural community. 3 years ago, this creative force, known for their revolutionary and deeply emotional designs, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a handful of masterpieces that had reshaped skylines and all the world. Ko Thuadian had always been an admirer, and he had a gut feeling, a deep, unshakable conviction, that only Ling Shuang could have created a design with a soul as profound and complex as the Star Tower. A month later, the annual Architects Association Gala was in full swing at the city's most luxurious 5-star hotel. It was a glittering affair, the perfect stage for Trinh Minh Triad and his new, high-profile partner, Jiang Nuoc to flaunt their recent triumph. Trinh Minh Triad, dapper in a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, arm in arm with a resplendent Jiang Nuoc in a ruby-red gown, was the undeniable center of attention. He moved through the crowd with a newfound, insufferable arrogance, pontificating to anyone who would listen about his design philosophy, about the divine spark of inspiration that had led him to create the Star Tower. "My success today," he declared, raising his champagne flute for a toast, a smug smile playing on his lips as he looked at Jiang Nuoc, "is half thanks to my muse, my inspiration, Ruoxu. She saw the genius in me when no one else did." Polite, if somewhat envious, applause erupted. Just at that moment, the grand ballroom doors opened quietly. A woman entered. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that fell to her knees. She wore no elaborate jewelry, and her long hair was tied back in a neat, low bun. Her face was elegant, serene, and unadorned. It was an Havii. Her appearance was like a stone dropped into a still pond. A corner of the ballroom fell silent. A few people, those who kept up with society gossip, recognized her as Trinh Minh Triad's recently divorced and thoroughly disgraced ex-wife. Their gazes were a toxic cocktail of curiosity, pity, and contempt. Well, look what the cat dragged in." Jiang Nuoc was the first to speak, her voice a silken weapon dripping with sarcasm. She glided towards an Havii, her red dress a slash of color against an Havii's black. "This isn't exactly a place for housewives, darling. What are you doing here? Did you get lost on your way to a housekeeping interview?" Trinh Minh Triad's face contorted in a flash of fury and public humiliation. This was his night, and her presence was a stain on it. He strode over, his voice a low, threatening his meant only for her. "An Havii, what the hell are you doing here? Are you trying to embarrass me? Get lost, now." An Havii didn't even look at him. Her calm eyes swept across the ballroom, serene and analytical, as if she were assessing a structure, not a room full of people. She completely, utterly ignored their insults. Her profound serenity, ironically, was more infuriating than any retort could have been. It was as if they didn't exist, as if their words were just meaningless noise. "Are you deaf?" Jiang Nuoc hissed, stepping forward, her hand raising as if to shove her. "Wait," a commanding, authoritative voice cut through the tense air, a voice that carried an undeniable weight. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Everyone turned, their expressions shifting to ones of awe and respect. The speaker was Lam Tu Keen, the legendary master architect, the honorary chairman of the association, a living monument in their field. He was a man so revered that even the city's most powerful tycoons would defer to him. Lam Tu Keen, with his distinguished silver hair and scholarly, dignified demeanor, walked through the crowd, completely ignoring the dumbfounded Trinmin Triad and Jiang Wok Tuet, as if they were pieces of furniture. He walked straight to Anhavi. To the absolute astonishment of everyone present, the venerable chairman, the titan of their industry, bowed slightly, a warm, genuine smile gracing his usually stern face. "It's been a long time, little one," he said, his voice filled with an unmistakable, fatherly affection. "I heard your faded dream studio is back in business. I was planning to pay a visit in a few days to see what you've been up to." The entire ballroom held its collective breath. Faded Dream Studio. That name. A few of the senior, more experienced architects in the room began to whisper amongst themselves, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning realization. Harvey finally smiled, a gentle, subtle smile that seemed to light up her entire being, transforming her from a wallflower into the most radiant person in the room. "I've only just returned, Uncle Lam. I didn't want to bother you with the small details just yet." "Nonsense," Lam Tu Keen chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "Your return is the biggest news this industry has had in years. Come, your place is at the head table, with the rest of us old fossils, not here." With that, he extended his arm in a formal, deeply respectful gesture, an invitation that was both an honor and a statement. "Please." The eyes of the entire ballroom were now fixed on them, wide with disbelief. Trinmin Triad and Jiang Wok Tuet were frozen in place, their faces ashen, their triumphant smiles now looking like grotesque, painted-on masks. The head table. That hallowed ground was reserved for the most influential, the most legendary figures in the industry. Why, in God's name, why was Anhavi invited there? Harvey nodded gracefully and walked calmly beside Lam Tu Keen, her simple black dress now looking more elegant than all the sequins and jewels in the room. She moved towards the VIP table, leaving behind her a sea of 100 stunned gazes and one Trinmin Triad, who was beginning to feel a cold, creeping fear coil in the pit of his stomach. He watched his ex-wife's retreating back. It was the same slender figure, but her aura, her very presence, was completely transformed. Gone was the submission, the quiet entrance. In its place was a bone-deep confidence, a natural, understated nobility that could not be faked, like a priceless gem that had finally been wiped clean of 3 years of accumulated ash. At the same time, in a discreet, shadowy corner of the ballroom, Kothu Adian had witnessed the entire, magnificent event unfold. He hadn't approached, content to observe. When he saw Lam Tu Keen, a man notoriously difficult, a purist who never bowed to money or power, treat Anhavi with such genuine, profound reverence, a brilliant spark of confirmation ignited in his sharp eyes. The final piece of the puzzle had just clicked into place. "Assistant Jong," he murmured into his wireless earpiece, his voice calm but electric with newfound certainty. "Scrap the old investigation. I have a new line of inquiry. Focus everything we have on Havi and her connection to a studio called Faded Dream." The wind had not just begun to rise. It was now howling, and it was blowing straight towards the eye of the storm in Star Tower. The bright, unforgiving morning sun beat down on the sprawling construction site of the Star Tower project, where a grand, opulent stage had been erected for the official groundbreaking ceremony. It was a media circus, hundreds of guests, a curated who's who of the city's elite titans of business, legendary architects, Government officials and the entire phalanx of the nation's press were in attendance. Trinmin Triet stood at the podium, a vibrant red corsage pinned to the lapel of his custom suit. He was, for this fleeting moment, the king of the world. His face was a carefully constructed mask of confident pride, but deep in his eyes, a frantic, hunted look flickered, a primal fear he was desperately trying to suppress. Ever since the gala, the image of an Havi walking away with Lam Tu Keen had become a recurring nightmare, a premonition he couldn't shake. Ladies and gentlemen, Trinmin Triet began his speech, his voice booming and self-assured, every word and gesture meticulously rehearsed for maximum effect. The Star Tower is not just a building, it is a dream. A dream of ascension, a testament to human ambition, a symphony of glass and steel. A dream that I have been honored to bring to life. He was lost in his own flowery, self-aggrandizing prose when a voice, as cold and sharp as breaking ice, cut through the warm air, silencing him mid-sentence. A fascinating philosophy, Mr. Cheng. Ko Thuadian, the chairman of the Disheng Group and the project's lead investor, rose from his seat in the front row. His movement was deliberate, unhurried, yet it commanded the immediate, undivided attention of everyone present. Every camera, every microphone, every pair of eyes swiveled to face him. "But I have a question," he continued, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable, lethal authority. "Such a beautiful dream. I wonder if it is entirely your own." The festive atmosphere in the venue instantly evaporated, replaced by a thick, palpable tension. Trinmin Triet stood paralyzed at the podium, a deer caught in the headlights. A single bead of cold sweat trickled down his temple. Mr. Ko, what do you mean? I don't understand." Ko Thuadian didn't answer him. Instead, he gave a subtle, almost imperceptible glance towards the main entrance of the massive, open-air tent. Following his gaze, the entire audience turned as one. The grand entrance flaps were drawn aside by two uniformed attendants. And Havi entered. She was no longer the understated woman in the simple black dress. Today, she wore a powerful, exquisitely tailored white pantsuit that was the epitome of modern elegance. It was a statement. Her long hair was not tied back, but flowed freely, cascading over her shoulders. And her eyes were no longer still like a lake. They were a storm, sharp as polished steel. And they were fixed on the man who stood frozen on the stage. "And Havi, you dare to show your face here? Are you here to cause trouble again?" Jiang woke to it, seated in the VIP section like a pampered queen, shot to her feet, her voice a shrill shriek of fury and disbelief. But an Havi didn't spare her a single glance. She walked down the long, red-carpeted aisle, each step steady, measured, and resounding with a purpose that silenced the whispers around her. It was as if she were not walking into a hostile environment, but reclaiming her own kingdom. She stopped directly in front of the podium, taking a microphone from a bewildered, star-struck staff member. She didn't ask for it, she simply took it. Trinmin Triet, her voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, was clear, resonant, and utterly devoid of the weakness he remembered. It echoed across the silent crowd. "In our 3 years of marriage, I deluded myself into thinking that even if love faded, there would at least be a minimum of human decency, of respect, left between us. I was wrong." Trinmin Triet's face was now completely drained of color, a sickly, chalky white. "You, what nonsense are you talking? Who let you in? Security. Get this crazy woman out of here." "Wait," Ko Thuadian's voice cut in again, sharp and final. "Let her finish. As I said, the Disheng Group takes matters of intellectual property and copyright very, very seriously." And Havi gave Ko Thuadian a brief, grateful nod, then turned back to face the entire assembly, her gaze sweeping over the sea of confused, intrigued, and hostile faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice now carrying a formal, commanding tone. "I believe many of you here, especially the esteemed seniors and masters in the field of architecture, have heard of a name from the past, Ling Shuang." The moment the name Ling Shuang was spoken, a wave of excited, shocked murmurs swept through the hall. It was a legendary name, a ghost, a great mystery that had been debated in architectural forums for years. 3 years ago, Ling Shuang disappeared from the world stage. And today, she lifted her chin, her eyes blazing with a fire that had been suppressed for far too long. She has returned. With a flick of her wrist, she connected a sleek, minimalist tablet she was holding to the massive LED screen that formed the backdrop of the stage. "This," she announced, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth, "is the original, hand-drawn concept sketch of the Star Tower, created on the night of August 15th, 3 years ago." On the giant screen, a breathtaking, hand-drawn sketch materialized. The lines were fluid, passionate, almost alive, yet the core structure, the very DNA of the building, was identical to the design Trinh Minh Triet had claimed as his own. And there, in the bottom right corner, was the elegant, unmistakable signature, a stylized, crystalline frost flower, the mark of Ling Shuang. "And this," she continued, swiping on the tablet, "is the full digital model, rendered the very next day, with original files that are time-stamped and encrypted with my unique biometric signature." Another image appeared. "And this is a time-lapsed video, recorded on my personal device, documenting my creative process from the first line to the final concept." One by one, the evidence, sharp, irrefutable, and digitally verifiable, was laid bare for the world to see. The hall fell into a stunned, dead silence. The truth was no longer a matter of opinion. It was a fact, displayed in 4K resolution. "No, no, it can't be," Trinh Minh Triet stammered, stumbling backward, his entire body trembling uncontrollably. His carefully constructed world was shattering into a million pieces around him. You're Ling Shuang," the question was a desperate, pathetic whisper. "Yes," and Havi looked him straight in the eye, her voice dropping to a level that was as cold and unforgiving as a winter glacier. "I am Ling Shuang, the woman you called useless, the woman whose soul you stole to build your fraudulent career, the woman you heartlessly cast aside the very moment you got what you wanted." Her every word was a sledgehammer blow. Landing with brutal precision, Trinh Minh Triet finally broke. He collapsed to his knees on the grand stage, his eyes vacant, his mind a black hole of utter ruin. It was over. The fame, the glory, the respect, it had all been a lie, a house of cards built on her genius, and she had just blown it down with a single breath. "No, she's lying. It's all fake. She's a psycho. She's obsessed with him." Jiong woke to it, shrieked hysterically from her seat, trying to salvage the unsalvageable, but her words were lost in the suffocating silence. No one was listening to her anymore. Ko Thieu-Dian walked calmly onto the stage. He took the microphone, his presence radiating an aura of absolute control. As the chairman and lead investor of the Star Tower project, his voice boomed, sharp and final. "I solemnly declare the following. The design contract with architect Trinh Minh Triet is hereby, and with immediate effect, terminated due to gross fraudulent activity and severe copyright infringement. The Disheng Group's legal department will be pursuing extensive legal action against Mr. Cheng and all associated parties to recover full damages and seek punitive reparations." He then turned to Havi. His usually cold, unreadable expression had softened, his eyes now filled with an open, profound respect and a hint of something else. A gentle, protective warmth. "And, on behalf of the Disheng Group, we would like to extend a formal, public invitation to Miss Ling Shuang. We hope to have the distinct honor of collaborating with the true creator, the true soul, of this masterpiece." And Havi looked at him, and after a moment that seemed to stretch for an eternity, She gave a firm, confident nod. In the audience, Lam Tu Keen rose to his feet and began to applaud, slowly and deliberately. His applause was like a signal, a royal decree. It was immediately followed by a thunderous, rolling ovation from the entire hall. They were applauding not just the return of a genius, but the triumph of justice, a spectacular, unforgettable revelation of the truth. Trinh Minh Triet sat crumpled on the stage, a pathetic, broken figure caught in the merciless, blinding flashes of 100 cameras, the sound of applause for the woman he had abandoned ringing in his ears like a death knell. His moment of glory, in a matter of minutes, had turned into his public execution, on the very stage he thought was the pinnacle of his life. The thick, suffocating mist that had hidden the priceless jade for 3 long years had finally been shattered by the roar of a righteous dragon. And from this day forward, the name in Havi, or rather, Ling Shuang, would not just shine, it would burn, brilliantly and eternally, in the world of architecture. The public unmasking of Trinh Minh Triet was a cataclysmic event, but for an Havi, it was merely the end of a chapter, not the end of the story. While the world celebrated the return of Ling Shuang, a shadow from a past she thought she had buried began to stir. The brighter the light she cast, the darker the shadows it created, and from one of those shadows emerged a ghost. His name was Duong Kai, a rival from her university days, a man whose talent was always overshadowed by hers, whose ambition was poisoned by a deep, festering jealousy. He was the runner-up in the prestigious national competition that had first launched her, as Ling Shuang, into the stratosphere. He had vanished into corporate obscurity, but he had never forgotten his humiliation. Now, seeing her triumphant return, his old grudge ignited into a dangerous obsession. He saw not her victory, but his opportunity. He didn't approach an Havi, he approached the one person as desperate and venomous as he was, Jeong Wook Tuet. He found her in a high-end, secluded bar, nursing an expensive drink with the air of a deposed queen. "I know how to destroy Ling Shuang," he said, sliding into the seat opposite her, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Because I knew her before she was a legend, I know her secrets." Their unholy alliance was forged in the fires of shared resentment. Their plan was far more insidious than simple slander. It was an attack on the very foundation of her identity. A week later, a prominent online architecture journal published an explosive expose. It featured a series of early concept drafts allegedly created by Duong Kai years ago. These drafts bore an uncanny, almost identical resemblance to Ling Shuang's most famous early works, the very designs that had built her legendary reputation. The article, heavily funded by Jeong Wook Tuet's remaining resources, insinuated that the great Ling Shuang was a fraud, that she had built her career by stealing the work of a forgotten, struggling artist. The story created a firestorm. It was a brilliant, toxic narrative. The powerful, celebrated female icon had crushed a talented, but less fortunate male peer. The internet, ever hungry for a scandal, began to turn. Doubts were sown. Her triumphant return was now tainted with a question mark. "This is a professional, coordinated attack," Ko Thuadian stated, his face grim as he sat with an Havi, her now bustling studio. His legal and PR teams were in full crisis mode. "They aren't just attacking the Star Tower. They're trying to erase your entire legacy." And Havi, however, remained unnervingly calm. She looked at the forged documents on the screen, her eyes analytical, not emotional. "He was always good at imitation," she said quietly, "but he was never good at creation. He copied the lines, but he could never copy the soul." She looked at Ko Thuadian, a flicker of a smile on her lips. "They've made a mistake. They've challenged me in the one place I am invincible, my own work." While Ko Thuadian's teams launched a relentless counter-offensive, digging into Duong Kai's past and exposing his connections to Jeong Wook Tuet, and Harvey I worked on her own response. She didn't need lawyers to defend her art. She needed her art to defend itself. Ko Thuadian watched, fascinated, as she retreated into her creative sanctum. He provided her with every resource she needed: security, technology, and most importantly, his unwavering, absolute trust. He saw in her not just a brilliant artist, but a masterful strategist. Their bond, forged in the heat of the initial crisis, was now being tempered into something stronger, something deeper, in the face of this new, shared battle. The turning point came not from a legal document, but from a piece of code. And Harvey I, a polymath who saw architecture and technology as two sides of the same coin, had invented a proprietary digital watermark years ago. It wasn't a visible mark. It was a complex algorithmic signature woven into the very metadata of her original digital files, a signature so deeply embedded and unique that it was mathematically impossible to forge or remove without corrupting the entire file. It was her ultimate proof of authorship, a secret she had never needed to reveal until now. 2 weeks after the scandal broke, and Harvey I called a press conference, she didn't invite just journalists. She invited the world's leading experts in digital forensics and intellectual property law. Duong Kai, emboldened by the public debate, brazenly attended, sitting in the front row with a smug look on his face. And Harvey I walked onto the stage, not with anger, but with the calm authority of a professor about to deliver a lecture. For the past 2 weeks, she began, there's been a debate about the authorship of my early works. Mr. Duong Kai has presented documents that he claims are his original drafts. Today, I am not here to deny his claims. I am here to verify them. She projected one of Duong Kai's original digital files onto the giant screen. This appears to be my design, she said calmly. Now, let us run a deep-layer algorithmic analysis. With a few keystrokes, she initiated a program she had designed. The screen filled with cascading lines of code. The experts in the audience leaned forward, intrigued. After a moment, a large, red notification flashed on the screen. Signature hash mismatch, evidence of file manipulation detected. A gasp went through the room. Now, and Harvey I said, her voice remaining perfectly level, let us analyze the original file, retrieved from my secure, time-locked deep archive server from 5 years ago. She loaded her own file. The analysis ran again. This time, a green notification appeared, and alongside it, a beautifully complex, evolving geometric pattern bloomed on the screen. This, she said, her voice resonating with quiet power, is my signature, my digital fingerprint. It is present in every authentic file I have ever created. Mr. Duong, would you care to show us the signature on your original files? Duong Kai's face had turned a ghastly shade of white. He was trapped. It was a checkmate of absolute, technological genius. He stood up, stammering, and tried to flee, only to be blocked by security and a barrage of reporters. The ice that had threatened to freeze her reputation had been shattered from beneath by a current of undeniable truth. The undercurrent of deceit had been exposed, and Harvey I had not only defended her past, but had also showcased a level of brilliance that went far beyond mere architecture, solidifying her status as a true visionary. The public dismantling of Duong Kai's conspiracy was the final, decisive battle. The aftermath was swift and brutal. News reports detailed the trifecta of ruin. Duong Kai was charged with fraud and defamation, his career permanently destroyed. Jeong Woak-tuet, her family's name now synonymous with scandal, faced her own set of lawsuits for her role in the conspiracy. And Trinh Minh Triet, the originator of the whole sordid affair, was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in the city's cafes. One viral photo captured him and Jeong Woak-tuet in a screaming match outside a rundown apartment building, their former glamour reduced to bitter, pathetic rage. They had each other, and in the end, that was their true punishment. A year after the groundbreaking ceremony, in the heart of the city's financial district, a new landmark was inaugurated. It wasn't a skyscraper, but a mid-rise building of breathtaking beauty. Its facade was a fluid, organic structure of glass and white steel, seeming to breathe with the city around it. This was the new headquarters of Ling Shuang Studio. No longer faded dream, a name born of past sorrow, but a name that represented a present and future of boundless brilliance. The launch party was the event of the year. The guest list was a testament to her new status: global investors, celebrated artists, and the architectural masters who had once been her idols. And Havi, dressed in a stunning, custom-made gown the color of a twilight sky, stood on the main atrium stage. She was no longer just an architect. She was an icon. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice warm and resonant, carrying to every corner of the vast space. "There was a time when I thought my dream had faded. But I've learned that dreams don't die. They simply wait for us to be strong enough to claim them." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. Ling Shuang Studio is not just about buildings. It is about creating spaces that inspire, that heal, and that hold the stories and emotions of the people within them. It is about building a better future, one beautiful dream at a time. In the front row, Kothu Adian watched her, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. He saw not just the legend Ling Shuang, but the resilient, brilliant, and deeply compassionate woman, and Havi. After her speech, as the party swelled around them over a happy buzz of conversation and clinking glasses, Kothu Adian led her to a quiet, private terrace overlooking the city. The newly completed Star Tower, her first reclaimed masterpiece, stood proudly against the night sky, its spire a glittering tribute to her genius. He turned to face her, his usually serious expression softened by an overwhelming tenderness. "Havi," he said, his voice low and earnest. "For years, I admired Ling Shuang from afar. I collected books about your work. I studied your designs. I felt like I knew the soul of an artist I had never met. But in this past year, I fell in love with an Havi. I fell in love with your quiet strength, your fierce integrity, and the incredible heart that drives your genius." He took a small, velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of dark silk, was a ring. It wasn't a simple diamond. It was a breathtaking, custom-designed piece of art, a platinum band that twisted and flowed like one of her buildings, culminating in a single, perfectly cut diamond held in place by delicate claws shaped like a crystalline frost flower. He dropped to one knee. "I can't promise you a life without storms," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "But I promise I will always be your anchor. I can't promise you the world, because you have already built your own. But I hope ... you'll let me be a part of it. And Havi, my brilliant, beautiful Ling Shuang ... will you marry me?" Tears, not of sorrow but of pure, unadulterated joy, streamed down on Havi's cheeks. She had walked through the deepest valley of betrayal and emerged on the highest peak of triumph. She had found her voice, her power, and now her partner. She nodded, unable to speak, and simply whispered, "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. He stood and pulled her into a deep, loving embrace, sealing their future with a kiss as the city lights twinkled below them a million fallen stars. She had been an Havi, lost in the shadows. She had been Ling Shuang, a legend in hiding. But now, standing here in the arms of the man who saw and loved all parts of her, she was finally, completely, whole. The splendor had awakened, and this time the sun would never set on her dream.